I wanted to share a few thoughts about the differences between a city in Russia and a city in America during this pandemic time. I've had the opportunity to spend several months in Moscow and St. Petersburg. A number of differences come to mind. Living in Russia is not at all threatening. When you walk down the streets in the city, you're surprised at how clean it is. There's virtually no litter. There's no bad odors. Every morning there are city crews that come and sweep the streets. If you're in Moscow or Petersburg in the center, you will see water trucks spraying down the sidewalks and the streets multiple times during the day. There's very little dust. And the blessing for being in Russia is that there, at this point in these two cities, no smoke, no fires. We had one hot spell in the 90s. Most days it's in the 70s and 80s in Moscow and similar in St. Petersburg. The climate changes have been reported to be more dramatic in Russia, but remember, Russia is a giant country crossing many time zones, and yes, Yakutia is on fire. That's the far north and eastern forests, the taiga of Russia. In Oregon, where I come from, it's very smoky right now, and there are a number of fires burning in different localities in Northern California and Oregon that make it smoky. Combined with hot temperatures, it can be kind of unpleasant. Here in Western Russia, there is no smoke. To continue, the fires in the taiga are as big as a small state, and it is significant. And down in the south towards Sochi, there are areas that are getting tremendous amounts of rain and flooding. Just like in the United States, there are some areas suffering. Moscow and St. Petersburg have been free of serious weather or fire problems. Air quality is very good. Temperature is normal. Well, normal is 75 to 85 degrees in the daytime. Occasional clouds, occasional rainstorms. Well, as a foreigner in Russia, I've mentioned the streets are clean. I've mentioned that there are no scary people, that you would worry that we might grab your purse. Now, the fact that you don't see them doesn't mean there aren't any, but crime is very low in Russia in general on the street. It's very rare to see anything that would scare you. 15 years ago, I could say there were more pickpocket types, there were more panhandler types. You would get a group, an ethnic group, maybe I shouldn't name, but would swarm you and try to ask you for money, and that's not legal. And eventually the police stopped them. And I haven't seen anything like that in several years. I do feel very safe here. And the same at night. A number of women tourists over the years I've asked, and they felt perfectly safe on the streets, walking alone. I would say stay on the public streets if you're a woman and walking alone. Don't head off into a dark alley somewhere, and just in case there's somebody hanging around that's not that reliable. But in general, there's an expectation that you're safe. If someone's having a problem on the street, there are people who will come up and say, "What's wrong? How can I help you?" It isn't as scary as it is in America, where you're afraid. If someone attacks you or someone takes your purse, you're on your own. And there is a little more expectation that people will obey the law, and people are worthy of our concern, and people will go out of their way to help. It's very common to ask for directions and expect a polite answer. The civility level is pretty good in Russia. So I'm trying to think where would it not be as good? Well, I've heard Russians themselves say that Russians care too much about appearances. They dress very well. They want to show that they're doing all right. They're wearing nice clothes, and I take it a little differently. I appreciate that when I walk by people, they look clean. Their hair's usually combed or neat. Clothes are usually clean. I don't see anybody wearing pajama bottoms in public or just having their hair look like a rat nest or something. I hate to say that about my fellow Americans, but in our shopping centers or big box stores, there are people that come that are a little spooky. They don't look clean, and I don't question their right to dress and groom themselves the way they like, but I also can say that I tend to move around them and not get too close. Okay, well, that's maybe not the kindest look at Americans. Most are pretty good, but we're very tolerant of questionable behavior. We don't we allow people enough freedom that they can mess up. They can not supposed to be drinking in public, but a lot of Americans kind of flaunt the rules, and that used to be the case in Russia. It used to be allowed to drink beer on the streets. People would get loud and party. They would break bottles. This is the Soviet era where the only entertainment left to people in their lives was to drink and become hooligans. And that's not true anymore. It's absolutely not allowed to drink in public. Smoking also is not allowed around other people. You can go a certain distance around a corner somewhere and smoke outdoors, but you're not allowed to smoke indoors with other people. You're not allowed to smoke in restaurants. Probably the only place you will see people smoking that you might notice it would be if you were in a bar and the bar had a veranda or a patio. People may be smoking on the patio even though technically they shouldn't be. Things have gotten a lot more pleasant, say in the last 15 years especially. 15 years ago in Russia, you would see a lot of gambling casinos. Every street in the center of Moscow or St. Petersburg you'd go down would have some kind of little gambling sign, a little business with some bright lights. Some would be full-fledged casinos, but there were a lot of really small gambling outlets. Well, that all became illegal. Gambling is only to be done in, I believe, 6 zones in Russia. They're designated like Las Vegas zones, and none around people and families in the cities. It's made a big difference. In that 15 years, the streets are what I would call normal. No drinking, no gambling, and no homeless. I guess I can say 15 years ago, occasionally I would see drunk people on the street, or on holidays, maybe I'd see groups of guys drinking. No more. Occasionally some homeless people, occasionally some homeless kids, say around 2002, 2003. In St. Petersburg, there were groups of kids. They would find a way to live. Often buildings would have empty basements. They'd find a window and they'd set up and they'd go around. Sometimes kind-hearted people would give them some money, but this is before the social services really got going. And these kids would hang out around restaurants and pick up plates after people left. There was also some negative things going on. Before Russia understood or was able to get under control the use of drugs and things like spray paint, especially young children would be seen with paint on their face. They would take a piece of cloth and spray it with paint and breathe through that as a kind of a high. Well, thankfully, these were understood to be serious problems, and the children were taken to orphanages or other places to take care of them. Hopefully most have been adopted, most have been straightened out, but they're no longer in the cities wandering as lost children. So that is a good thing. I would say in the 90s, when Russia first became democratic, it was the Wild West. There's no infrastructure in place to protect people from unemployment, from any problems of society. The Alcoholics Anonymous programs came to Russia and grew. Other ideas, often borrowed from other countries who had these freedoms for a long time and were dealing with it, were very helpful. Now that Russia's sort of come into its own, it's trying to handle all those problems, and at least for normal working people and families, tourists, you don't see these problems anymore. Doesn't mean they don't exist. It's very sad to people that get drug problems, and it is illegal. They end up incarcerated. They end up in programs to help them, and they're kind of looked down upon as failures in society, and they feel bad. And dealing with this in a more positive way to recover is in process here, and I did witness that in Siberia, where a program in Irkutsk that seems to be working very well, where people can find their way in life without needing the drugs. What else may I say? Social problems are seen less, thankfully. There are orphanages with children that don't have families. Americans used to come and adopt kids, and part of our political wrangling, Russia has decided Americans should not be adopting children. There were one or two incidences where it didn't go well, and also accusations in Congress of things that Russia was doing that they didn't like. And true or not, each side does a tit-for-tat adjustment, whether it's for visas or for relations, for in Americans' case, applying sanctions. That seems to be the number one influence America has over the world, besides its military, is to apply sanctions. And I believe there's more than 200 applied in Russia, and it seems that every few months there's a few more, to the point where they're pretty much ignored. It's not a part of people's daily lives. Yes, they did hurt the economy. The ones since 2014 till now. But do people think about it? No. You ask people, do you know what the sanctions are? Do they affect you? No, they don't affect us at all. Life is difficult. It always was difficult. And we deal with it, and here we are. It makes us as Americans think we've done something if we apply sanctions. I don't see them as anything but grandstanding and pretty minor in terms of affecting changes that we want to happen. I can suggest that diplomacy is a wonderful thing, and sincere diplomacy has far better chances of making positive changes than military interventions or other kinds of social meddling and sanctions that we attempt to do. I think we're learning that. It usually has not turned out. I hope we're learning that. There are so many topics that are a little different but the same. For example, food. When you go to the grocery store, there are big box groceries as big as any in America, and there's lots of neighborhood markets, and both are used quite a bit. The selection in the big box stores can match pretty much any chain store in America. It doesn't mean all American products are there. No, because of sanctions, some things that we were selling here are not available anymore. One of the side effects of sanctions is Russians are great consumers. Even though their economy is about number 11th in the world, their buying power is number 6, and they would rather buy things than make them. Well, the sanctions have changed that. The agricultural business here to provide food and food products has gone very well. I think a farmer now could say he can thank America for the sanctions. It's improved our economy here in Russia, I should say, the economy of the farmer and agricultural and food products. Also, it's helped Iran. Iran is selling a lot of food products to Russia, and good ones. Maybe Europe misses a few Russian products, I don't know, but we certainly don't see as many European products in the stores as we used to. The result is, over time, Russia is making more and more things. The prices have not gone down. No, they're a little bit higher. There's a little bit of shortage of some of the special goods. As an American, I used to always bring a bottle of maple syrup and a jar of yellow mustard. Those were two things you couldn't buy here. Well, actually, you can buy maple syrup now in any big box store, and it's kind of hard to find things to bring that aren't easy to get here, even if it's a little more expensive than at home. I'm trying to think what I've been able to bring that's special, and, well, I bring some macadamia nuts, for example, or maybe something that Costco makes. It's hard to find in Russia. Sometimes there's a tasty food that nobody else has that Kirkland and Costco decided to make. So, okay, bring something of that along. But for the daily shopping, there is probably more diversity here because of this transition going on between foreign and regional and local products that it's sometimes hard to choose. If you want to choose a ketchup, you may have 30, 40 varieties sitting on the shelf with all different mixtures. And how do you pick your ketchup? Well, you get to sample and find what you like. It's interesting that in cheeses, you know, a cheese that would have come from Europe or Italy probably comes from Iran, and now comes from Russian cheesemakers, and it's getting pretty good. There used to be a big difference in cheeses, and the regional and local providers are catching up. I would say the same about regional wines, and even wine in Russia is growing, and they won't be the next Napa or France, but you know, pretty decent wines are starting to be seen. In America, as we've seen that our low-fat diet that was sanctioned by the government and the Heart Association has actually increased problems because it's increased sugar and carbs and reduced the good fats in our diet. Also the grains, the concerns about gluten and white processed carbs that we are big in our diet. When we go shopping in Russia, we see, well, there's a lot of grains we don't have in America, and there's a lot of less preservatives. I can't say that Russia isn't starting to show some of those, but to buy a little more natural food that are traditional here is fun to find. To start eating the grains that may be just being discovered in America again. Well, they've been here a long time. If you want, I don't know, bulgur, buckwheat, barley, millet, chia, other unusual grains besides wheat, you can find them in the store. I went shopping to a number of big box groceries in America looking for rye flour. I said, I want some 100% rye bread. And look at that. On the shelf, all these good bakeries are saying that they're making rye bread. Some say that they're making Russian bread. Well, look at, they've all got white flour in them and just a touch of rye. I come to Russia and I can get bread made with 100% rye. Black bread, good bread, healthy bread. And I say, well, why can't I do that in America? I don't know, but I'm sure in America there are places that grind and can give you 100% rye flour and other grains, but I didn't find them. I've even thought, well, it's time to go to the farmer's co-op and start buying feed for animals, get my groats and oats and grains that we might consider bird seed, and there you go. We found some healthy food. I can say that the traditional Russian diet's pretty healthy because that was part of the Soviet intention, and that many things are fairly simple and produced on the farm and eaten, and not as much meat in the diet, perhaps, because it's more expensive. And people are growing their own gardens in the summer and appreciating the value of greens and vegetables and different fruits, from apples to all kinds of berries. Every fall, I've noticed a bunch of woven baskets, particularly in St. Petersburg. You'll see a little bus heading out to the countryside, and it'll be full of people with baskets. What are they doing? Mushrooms and berries. The fall is the time to collect berries for your jellies and mushrooms, and it's a real treat, a real pleasure to have it. And that's kind of fun to see. Overall, it's very healthy food. And now what's happening today? Well, I can say I've noticed more people overweight in Russia than I did 15 years ago. Russian people do like their sweets. They do love their cakes and their breads. And I can say that as the economy improved a little from what it was in 2002, people are eating better and perhaps more of what they want, and it's easier to put on some pounds and develop some of the health problems that we Americans know so well. Luckily, people here are learning from foreigners and saying, we don't want to be like that. And you'll see a large number of people living very healthy, active lifestyles. I was in the town of Odentsovo a couple times in the last month, and that's more like a self-contained town. It's near Moscow, but it's on its own. And you go to the city park there, it is absolutely packed with people doing physical activity. There's a soccer field that's open, a track that's open, there are skate parks, lots of trails, families walking with baby buggies, kids with scooters going around, playing games, just people of all ages out enjoying being physically active. And it's kind of delightful. I try to remember even as a child, before America got so overweight, we did have people out in the evening. They weren't sitting home watching TV as much. A few did, but most were out. Some were on their front porch if they couldn't do more, but many were walking, saying hi to the neighbors. The neighborhood kids were all gathering at parks to play pickup games of baseball or whatever, basketball or badminton, whatever they had, and being active. It was seen as the way you should live. You should be active. And I don't see that as much as I used to, and it's part of the changes in America. Hopefully can address a little better. So overall, walking down the street, you can notice less pounds on people than you do on an American street. Not to say that there are no overweight people, there are a few, and where I see them more often is office workers going home for the day. A lot of them are very sedentary during the day and have the same challenges that we Americans have, that if you sit in an office and work all day and maybe have a nice lunch and a few snacks, you have to really watch yourself in the rest of your life and be active, or you're going to start developing those health problems that Americans particularly have discovered. So what's it like, say, to be an expat in Russia? There is an expat community, and there's small communities of different ethnic groups, but it is small. I don't think there's a movement, at least not yet, for, say, Americans to retire in Russia. The dollar's strong. It's a safe, clean environment. It's okay to be Orthodox Christian if you want. Maybe that's the wrong way to say it. Religious freedom is here. Perhaps LGBT rights are a little bit behind here, even though there are quite a few LGBT people in Russia. They are a little bit quieter in their public activities than in America, and partly because there's a sensitivity to children. Russia's recently passed laws that are to protect children from gay propaganda, basically, and that could be in the eye of the beholder. So on a television show, there would be much more hesitant to show a gay couple, say, raising a baby or holding hands and kissing in public. These things are still uncomfortable in Russia. It doesn't mean they don't go on. It just means that society has not been ready to accept that as a behavior for everybody. And America just in the last few years has made a lot of this progress, and I'm hesitant to be too critical of other countries. There's certainly countries that have more religious populations that are much more conservative than Russia. Russia is pretty tolerant. It's illegal to be prejudiced by race or age, and all the good things that we value as Americans are in place. It doesn't mean there aren't some individuals that could be offended or say something when they don't like it. I would say it's even more noticeable in America these days. The political fighting in America right now is the worst I've ever seen, and what seems to be genuine misunderstanding and hatred of what I would consider law-abiding citizens in general has been kind of shocking. And I do hope that we can make progress in that and not be such a polarized society. I do see a lot of positive in American society and in Russian society, and way more overlap in the good things than any negatives. There certainly is no organized anti-American movement to try to discredit or undermine American politics. It just isn't here. You may hear a few politicians somewhere in America or in Russia saying something anti-American or anti-Russian, but it's not a big part of the social scene in Russia. It's pretty much ignored. What we do in America is not that interesting anymore. It was 15 years ago. If I was down the street talking to somebody and they figure out I was American, they would say, "Oh, how's Disneyland? We always want to go to Disneyland." Or how about California? You've been in you live in California? Oh, well, that sounds warm and nice. We'd like to go there. I'd say in this 15 years, a lot of Russians have been to California or New York or different parts of the country, and that fascination and curiosity about who Americans are is not there anymore. I'd say since these 20 years, they've seen a lot more Americans saying anti-Russian things that kind of surprised them. A few years ago, we had some students from Siberia visiting in Oregon, and they happened to watch the news, and some kind of Democratic people past the Hillary Clinton election were blaming Russia for all kinds of things. In fact, for almost every bad thing in America, it seemed there was someone on MSNBC or CNN blaming it on Russia, and it brought one of the students to tears. She said, why do they think this about that? Why do they think this about Russia? It's not us. We have no understanding of why they would hate us in Russia. Well, I guess people that take a step back understand that sometimes in politics people need a scapegoat, and Russia was the big scapegoat for 2014. And even though virtually all the charges fizzled as no basis or fabrications, there's still some people in media and in politics that keep that same narrative going, and quite frankly, it's counterproductive. When you have a problem in your country, whether it's Russia or America, it sure would be nice to own up to it and do something positive to address it. And the more you point fingers at somebody, the more time goes by where the problem hasn't been dealt with. So that's just my little advice on the side, that America has no one to blame but themselves, ourselves, and we need to take responsibility for what we're doing. If there's something we don't like, fix it. It's that simple. We have a democracy. We have rules made by people we elect, and it's our own fault if something's not going our way. We made it that way, so let's fix it. I'm with you. Anyhow, in Russian politics, the thing that bothers Americans the most is that Putin guy. He's been in power through 5 presidents. It's been quite a long time, and that doesn't seem very democratic. And in recent years, that's understandable. But Putin has been elected in pretty fair elections by a strong majority of the Russian people. There's always going to be supporters that are loyal to the end, and that's true in American politics. But what Russia hasn't had, at least in the national level, is an alternate, a viable alternate candidate. The United Russia Party has pretty much dominated the federal election. However, in the local and regional elections, there are a number of parties and quite a variety of people get elected, and democracy is pretty alive and well. In the federal level, that's kind of complicated because on the one hand, there's a real appreciation for the stability that Putin has brought to this country after the breakup of the Soviet Union and the terrific financial and organizational crisis. Now, part of getting that stability is he's worked with people that we might not like as well. The people that got rich by grabbing corporations and resources right after the breakup. And that's an understandable concern. Sometime in the early years, Putin got together with a number of the rich oligarchs that controlled main industries, and he said, look, we know how you got where you are. We know how you got your money. And we can let that be so long as you pay your taxes, are following Russian law, and stay out of politics. Then you can keep doing your business and making your money. But if you try to use your money to enter politics, that's not going to be good. So why did Putin say that? He came from a different point of view. He was trained as a lawyer, was a KGB or intelligence services officer. He learned German. He was stationed in Germany. Well, when they were looking at people to replace Yeltsin and who were capable and could navigate the complex web of post-Soviet people and the desire for democracy and stability and economic growth for this new, smaller, less ambitious country, Vladimir Putin rose up for two reasons. One, he wasn't going to use it to further his riches. He wasn't an oligarch looking to have more power and make more money. And second, there was no evidence that he would ever take any money. People tried to buy his influence, and he refused them. And for those two reasons, he rose up as a viable candidate to manage this new Russia, the Russian Federation. And in the early years, he got a lot of accolades for bringing stability and economic growth. I can remember maybe 2004, 2005, the attempts to reduce corruption, because it was seen as the problem that held down the middle class, the business people that needed to get ahead, that broadened the Russian economy. And that had some effects for a little while. Then there was another little bit of a crisis in the economy, I think 2008, like it happened in America. And some of that corruption snuck back in, where local officials were asking for money. So there were a couple steps forward and a step backwards. And after the sanctions, the same thing can be said, that there was more entrenchment of these kind of tendencies to do business that benefited you. That's the wrong way to say it. In recent years, basically because of sanctions, it's gotten harder to do normal business, to make money, and there's been, again, an increase in what I would say is corrupt money, or at least from an American point of view. From a Russian businessman point of view, it's just getting commissions or awards to help you do what you need to do, or in order to go forward. And it's unfortunate. I do think it's also tightened up the authoritarian approach of the presidency, that when the country is under tougher economic sanctions and right or wrong, that's been used to fortify the policies coming from the central government to manage the country. It's also been in danger of crossing lines when you have political ideas that are different than your own, and especially when you have candidates different than your own. When should a government label someone as a terrorist organization? When should someone enter a discourse of ideas and let the best man win? That's been a little tricky in Russia, and it's also a big issue in America now. How to win the hearts and minds of people, and to do that you have discourse of different ideas. And when one side wants to win by silencing those ideas, it's no longer a democratic process. It's now more of a fascist process, and we have to be very careful about doing that. And same in Russia. We can hope that there'll be a path to broadening democracy and the economy for everybody. It will come. It always comes. It will come in America again, but the path is a little unclear. So what's it cost to live in Russia? I'd say if you want to be in the big cities of St. Petersburg and Moscow, the rents are similar to a city in America, not the highest, although there are elite apartments that can match New York's Manhattan prices, no problem. But people don't make as much money in Russia, say a quarter or less of the salaries for the same job. So most people are living in apartment buildings. Many of them own their apartments. Under the Soviet government, which is now 30 years in the rear view mirror, people were given apartments. And now, under a capitalist democratic system, people have to buy their apartments, get a job, get a mortgage. Very American process now. And to do that, people are buying apartments further from the center of the city, commuting to work, all the things that we know well in America. And it is possible. You can buy an apartment because of the strength of the dollar. You can buy an apartment away from the center of the cities for a reasonable price, maybe half the price I would pay in American city. For example, if you found a condominium for $100,000 in America, which is kind of the low end, you might find that same setup for $50,000 or $60,000 in Russia. So there is some savings. Sometimes in a new building, you can buy an apartment before the building's built and get a considerable discount. And the best deal is to buy an apartment with bare walls. So you buy an apartment that will have concrete walls, a couple water pipes, maybe one light bulb in the center, just minimalist, no finishing work done, and take that project on at your leisure after you get into the apartment. And that's a pretty common scenario now for young people with families to save a little money, buy a new apartment, and work it into a home over time. Thanks to the strength of the American dollar, food's a little cheaper here. thanks to the government, if you own an apartment, property taxes are very low here. Electric and water prices are going up. I would say similar to American prices in general for utilities. Sometimes you can find deals. If you buy a Mercedes that's built in Russia, you might be surprised to find it under $20,000 for a brand new Mercedes. Quite a bit less than you'll find it in America. So there's pluses and minuses. But overall, Russia is not a bad place for an American to live. If you have an American salary and live in Russia, you're doing very well. You're ahead of 80% of the population anyway, so you can feel happy. You can have a car, and price of gas is a little lower here. You do need insurance. The rules are very similar, but you can live well on an American salary here. On retirement, that's a good question. If you can work out your housing in Russia, other expenses will be lower, your dollar will go farther, so you could do better if you can figure out your housing. Otherwise, if you're renting, then you're probably paying the same as you would for a low-income place in America for a senior on Social Security, for example. It's still tricky to put that together here in a better way, because in America we have a parachute, we have subsidized rents, we have senior apartments, we have a huge safety net, food banks, I want to say medical services, but actually they're probably a little better in Russia because there is free government medical and there are private medical. The private medical, which I've used, you just pay for what you use, and that's been a better deal than any insurance or program I've seen in America for me. But we know that that's in Congress, and maybe America will lead the way again on health care. That would be a nice change. I grew up believing America's number one in just about every category. Education, people argue about that now. I think many think we've fallen some. In Russia, they seem to be getting better. It was a rough time when the Soviets fell and schools were in disarray. But the kids that I've met here that have been on an exchange program to America say, America schools are easy. They just, the only thing they had to do was learn good English, that their coursework was in good shape when they transferred from Russia to America. So I don't know. I'm sure there's variance in that. But overall, if a person is here, as I've been for the last several months, not worrying about fires, not worrying about over 100 degrees Fahrenheit days all summer or things like that, have been very positive. I can't really complain. People have been considerate of me. Most people have a little bit of English. If you learn to read a little bit of Russian, to read signs and instructions, just basically, and the real challenge there is not that hard. It's learning the Cyrillic alphabet, and it overlaps about half with the American alphabet. So really, it's kind of like a game. And the roots of the words are often shared. So understanding what you need to know to get by in public in Russia is not that hard. In a couple months, a person can feel very comfortable here. Now, to actually hear Russian well and converse, that takes study and time. And it is possible, and if you like language, it could be a real joy. Well, these are the things that come to mind today, and I probably left out lots of interesting differences and similarities between America and Russia, but I can say they're not mutually exclusive countries. Peoples think very similarly, surprisingly, maybe to Americans who want to think that we think different and better than everybody else. I'm sure everyone knows this, but there are good people everywhere, and I'd say the majority of people in any country are good-hearted. They know the golden rule, treat people like you like to be treated, which is kind of the basis for all law systems. And we can get along. It's not a hard thing. Where it becomes hard is if you're fighting over resources. If you want to be making billions selling oil, well, you have a different interest. If you want to make a lot of money selling military arms, well, now you might find reasons not to like other countries so you can sell your arms, for example. But as far as people to people and normal day-to-day business, there aren't that many significant differences that would keep us from getting along. And knowing that is a fun thing to discover and know that it's true in every country I visited. And knowing that gives us hope that we can get along, and we will over time. There isn't much choice. You can get along or you can fight and shoot each other, and then you have to get along. So what good does it do to kill people if the end result is the same? We need to get along, and we will. Thank you for listening.